Hello, I'm Brittany Hazelton, and this is Architects Artistry, where we explore the arts in our area. Today we're talking about Ends of the World Comics, a new comic book publisher who's establishing themselves in Shreveport, Bossier. Ends of the World Comics are aiming to bring international works from all across the world to North America. They started with their first comic book, or graphic novel, called Clandestine Stories. And this graphic novel, was developed by artists who were living under, Chilean artists who were living under an oppressive military dictatorship. They lived being chased by police. The military was trying to arrest them, and they were photocopying comic books and spreading them in bars despite the military, again, fighting against their oppressive dictatorship. Their dictatorship ended in 1990 and went on from 1973 to 1990. And these artists are still alive today. And this didn't happen very long ago. And these artists got in connection with an LSUS professor who has a PhD in Latino American film and art, and he teaches comic book arts to students at LSUS today. Him and his brother, the Cannon brothers, have decided to create Ends of the World Comics with the support of the Chilean government. So enjoy this conversation. It's very great, and it's insightful, and I cannot express how much I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, and enjoy. Hello, I'm Brittany Hazelton, and this is Architects Artistry, where we explore arts culture in our area. Today's guests are on the path to opening a new comic book publishing company called Ends of the World. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm Sam Cannon. I am the co-founder and editor of Ends of the World Comics. I'm also a professor and research Latin American literature and comic art, and I teach at LSUS here in town. And beyond that, I think that's most of what I do. I got a couple kids, and we go to Comic Cons and do comic book stuff.
And I'm Jeremy Hefner. I'm the director of PR for Ends of the World. Um, Other than that, other than Ends of the World, I work for the Bossier Arts Council. But here we just try to, take things in a man, I am actually bad at the on the fly questions.
It's okay.
Um,
Consider it a conversation.
well, and it's kind of an amalgamation of things. So like we kind of just work as a group. The titles I don't think are necessary. Kind of we just talk about art direction and concepts for merchandise and like ways to push the comics and ways that we can help the artists. So
All right. So I'm going to start with background. Can you give me a little background on the upcoming publishing company that you're creating? How did the idea start?
All right, so this is it's a long story, and it's been really a big part of my life and of my brother Christopher's life, and he's the other co-founder. Um, so many years ago, I moved to Mexico City. I lived there for several years and learned Spanish. So without that happening in my life, we wouldn't have got to this point. But returning from Mexico City, when I was about 21 years old, I started studying Spanish at LSUS here in Shreveport, and I got my bachelor's degree in Spanish. And along the way, I came across Latin American literature and film, and I like fell in love with it. And so I pursued a master's degree and a PhD in those topics so that I could teach Latin American film and art. And so that's like a passion that I've had for many years, devoted most of my adult life to that. And along the way, I started researching comics out of Mexico City. It came from doing laundry one night, very late. You know, you're a college student,
Mhm.
got to stay up late, do laundry, flipping channels. And I saw this Mexican television series called El Pantera, the Panther. And it's about this guy who um, begins to fight crime in Mexico City, and he finds out that the crime he's fighting is the police and the military. And
Oh.
he starts to fight kind of political corruption. And so it's a story about an underdog in the city who's fighting the police and corruption in Mexico City. And I found out it was based on a comic book from the 70s.
Oh.
So there's a 70s comic book called El Pantera from Mexico City. And I started reading that and researching the changes that happened between the comic book in the 70s and the TV series that was produced in the 2000s, and studying the visual elements of those two texts. And that was how I got into comics. Now,
Oh.
from there, I researched a bunch of different comics, and a friend of mine, one of my best friends and colleagues from Chile, South America, his name is James Stagg, and he gifted me a graphic novel that he picked up when he was home one year. And he said, "This looks like the stuff that you're researching and writing about. So here's this book." And I opened the book and it just like blew my mind. It was an amazing group of about 16 artists who got together to make a single graphic novel based on the book series written by a famous detective writer in Chile.
Oh.
And that totally shifted my focus in my research and my attention. I dove headfirst into Chilean comics. I had opportunity to go there and do research and meet a lot of the authors. Um, Along the way in like 2015, I had the opportunity to present a paper of my academic research at San Diego Comic Con. And so I go to present the research on these Chilean comic artists. And coming out of that panel, a guy came up to me and he says, "Hey, I'm the guy who drew the whole book that you were just talking about."
Oh, wow.
So I had no clue that the artist all the way from Chile would also be in San
Yeah,
Diego.
that's
He
wild.
he went through the list of things that were going on. He saw that someone was talking about his book and went to the panel. And luckily, he agreed with what I had to say about his text, and we struck up a friendship. And from there forward, I've had the really great privilege and opportunity to work with a lot of Chilean comic artists. In 2016, we organized, along with my friend James, the first panel of Chilean comic artists to attend San Diego Comic Con and represent Chile with a panel completely dedicated to Chilean comics and in Spanish.
Oh, that's
Uh,
awesome.
and so we were supported by the Chilean government to fly these artists to San Diego, which is not, cheap to do.
No.
And since then, I've collaborated with the Chilean government through an institution within the government called Pro Chile. And it is a group that tries to make connections between Chilean creative industries and international markets. And so they flew me down to Chile, the Chilean government, and asked me to do an assessment kind of the comic industry. And so I got to sit down for over several days and meet with pretty much every comic editor, comic publisher, any artist that wanted to come and meet. I got to meet. And so it was wonderful for my research and also for getting a big picture of what's going on in comic books in another country. I've been really lucky to have access that I don't think other people have had. And so
Yeah.
I've got to spend time in the National Archives, and the National Museum of Chile has a section dedicated to comic books and visual arts. And so just amazing opportunities. Along the way, many artists and friends, comic creators there had said, "Why don't you, you know all these works, you know Spanish, why don't you translate our stuff and publish in the US?" And I said, "I would love to, but I have a job already, a full-time job."
Yeah, that's a
Um,
big task for
yeah,
anybody. Yeah.
and luckily some of that work can roll into my academic work. So, translating and publishing works from around the world that are relevant, that's a part of what academia does, at least in my
Yeah.
ideas, to connect ideas and bring new ideas together for different groups and different people. Um, but a few years ago, my brother Christopher, he was wrapping up, um, concluding another family business. So my family is a Shreveport small business family. My dad ran Canon Services for about 30 years, which is a commercial restaurant equipment repair business in Shreveport. And
Hmm.
so that was our life was Shreveport's small family business. And
Yeah.
so when that family business concluded, my dad and folks were ready to retire. And so Christopher helped them do that. And then afterwards, he started thinking about, well, what do I want to do now? You know, he could start kind of a new project and a new endeavor. And he came to me one day and he said, hey, we were brainstorming ideas, and I decided it would be cool to make like a comic book company.
Very
And I was like,
nice.
oh, that's pretty cool. And then he said, but then we realized we had to figure out where you get comic books from, like to publish. And
Yeah.
said, well, luckily my brother studies comic books for a living and has you know, an office full of hundreds of amazing graphic novels and comic books.
Well, then you two are perfect for this, it seems.
Yeah. And so he said he knows like the business side of business stuff, which I know zero about. So I do the artistic side. I do the communicating with folks in Latin America and our international friends and collaborators. And then Christopher deals with the business side of things, the financing, budgeting, taxes, contracts, all of those things, as well as getting in touch with distributors and other things like that. And that's a little bit in this long trajectory of how Ends of the World comics came together. It was really a lot of different lucky pieces happening. Um, and we have a really cool opportunity to do this now.
Sounds fated to me, with all the coincidences and intricacies that had to come into play for you to get this idea and start the work that you guys are going to do. That's really awesome, especially to hear that it's in Shreveport. That's awesome.
I think it's funny that you guys started as just like such a small Shreveport local family business and now are just across the globe. That's the
Yeah,
goal.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. So are, so you're obviously passionate about comics. I don't even need to ask you that. Like, what is like for you, like youngest age, you remember reading comics, and what comic stands out, like something that really sparked that for you?
Yeah, you know, what I'd have to say is the comic that was like got me into comics was Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh man.
Like I read so many Calvin and Hobbes as like an 8 or 9 year old probably. I was homeschooled, and so like I didn't even have friends to hang out with. It was like me and Calvin and Hobbes, and then of course like my siblings around the house. But for me, it was that. The other piece of it that's really kind of a heartwarming tale a little bit is that we were homeschooled, and so it was four siblings at home, and my little sister did not want to learn how to read, it seemed
No.
like. And so my mom came up with the idea that we would draw storybooks to help her learn how to read
Oh.
with animals from like our pets that we had at home. So my brother and I drew a series of early reader books for our little sister with chihuahuas and donkeys and horses in them.
Oh.
And so we were drawing all the time. Christopher and I both, like, we just used to sit at the coffee table with a stack of papers and draw all day if we could get away.
Sounds like me when I was young too. I drew constantly. Yeah.
That's how you turn into a cool artist weirdo.
That's true. It's very true. That's crazy. Calvin and Hobbes, I read it. My husband, especially, that was something he read. That was a big influence on him when he was younger. So, I had friends that read Captain Underpants and all those other
Oh, yeah.
interesting novels. But I admire it. That's great. Good influences, I feel like. So,
Yeah. And I've got a little follow-up on that, I think, from just in the comic books and passion for comics. On that, I also get to teach art students and literary students how to create visual narratives. And so some of the
nice.
classes that I get to teach are specifically on narrative structure and visual storytelling. And so diving into comics and like the poetics of comics and the structure of comics and how you can play with meaning through visual modes is really valuable and important because we're getting to a place in our culture where the visual is the main cue for us to interpret and engage with our world through Instagram, social media. We know this like
Yeah.
TikTok. And so for me as an educator, it's really important to emphasize that we need to educate our future scholars, our future leaders, our future like whoever, moms and dads, skateboarders, trapeze artists, whoever we're going to grow up and be. It's important for us to know how to deal with visual information and how it relates to text. And so there's really important ways that our culture is being driven and pushed through visual and text together in little clips that we're having to decipher constantly. And if you're not educated in how that works and how you can be misled and how you can be like brought to a conclusion that's not obvious in neither the image nor the text, but is a third thing, that's what I like to teach and go, how do you get to there's a third thing happening in comics that is this hybrid thing between text and image that if the great thing about comics is they sneak in and they're like, we think they're for kids and that they're like, they don't anything or they're just like whatever. But they're one of the only art forms that the US government has really attempted to legislate and censor.
Yeah.
And so, though there's power in there and there's value, we just need to make sure that everybody's getting an education about how to engage with it appropriately and meaningfully, and to not be duped.
Yeah.
Speaking of the censorship of comics as an art form, there's a little bit of history with clandestine stories that we could get into, which is our comic that we have available for purchase currently.
Yeah.
You've met,
Yeah. Is it all right if we talk about that?
Yeah,
Does that
go
throw you
ahead.
off? Or
Yeah.
yeah, I think for this, the first graphic novel that we have out, the one that's currently available, it's Clandestine Stories. And so talking about censorship is something that is close to comics all around the world, unfortunately. And the authors who created this comic grew up during a dictatorship in Chile. So from 1973 to 1990, there was a military dictatorship in Chile. Unfortunately, it was backed by the US government, and we were deeply involved through the CIA and other financial institutions with what happened during that dictatorship. And that's part of the history that we need to deal with and learn. But the other part of that is that when the dictatorship began in Chile in 1973, they made it illegal to publish imagery in magazines. And so the comic strips that were being published at the time in protest published comics with no pictures, but
Oh,
just
wow.
words. They just had the word balloons and everything else censored. And the comic industry basically collapsed during that time. The government, the military dictatorship, the military regime took over the main publishing houses and then ceased to produce comics. And so there was a censorship of imagery and of comics that was really the foundation for these books that we're trying to share now, is folks who grew up in those moments and lived literally in hiding underground, and survived to tell their story after military dictatorship.
I think it's very important that we show history and in the truest form that we can, and you're putting their history out there. You're giving them a voice when they didn't have one before. So I think
Yeah, well,
that's a great passion to have.
and I think a little bit, these artists, they maintained that art underground in homes, photocopying comics. Like really, the comic scene was this edgy underground scene of people who the cops were after and who were photocopying stories that the government didn't want people to read, and they were passing them around in bars. And these are folks who are, our friends that we work with and collaborate with, who lived through this time. So it's not some long time ago. These are people that I have dinner with and visit and talk to, and that are my friends. And so it's unreal, but at the same time, it's not just like their story there. It's also our story here, because as international citizens, people who are going to engage with the rest of the world, we need to understand that we don't come with no cultural baggage or what the perspective of America means in other places and what it means to be American when you're not in America. And that's a really important and transformative experience that I had the benefit of having. I just moved to Mexico when I was 19 years old and I didn't speak Spanish, and I got yelled out in the street frequently for just being an American that didn't know the things that my country had done in these other places.
Yeah.
And the problem is we're not informed, and we're intentionally misinformed and misled. And that's part of that is I had to go get Freedom of Information Act documentation during my research to be able to know what was going on with these programs in South America during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Um, and so it's really challenging to be an informed American citizen when you have to go, beg for redacted notes on what your government that's supposed to represent you is doing out there in the world. And so I think for us to be better citizens and just well-informed people, um, we need to hear those stories from other perspectives, from
Yeah.
other vantage points,
Yeah.
because we get one perspective of the story here, and we know that there are other angles. And so we're trying to bring stories that provide us other angles into insight and other perspectives on stories that we just haven't got the chance to hear yet.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm happy that you're doing that. I feel like, it's important, that artists like, these artists get their voice. It's important, especially, since our nation had something to do with everything that happened.
Yeah, and I think it's really healing to get to sit down with an artist who's written a book that has a challenging perspective on your own country's history.
Yeah.
And so that's always challenging because we want to feel good about where we're from and feel good about who we are as peoples. And there is a lot of good. And the challenge is making sure we take the time to see that in each other. And that
Well,
might, read
we can
stories.
only get better through criticizing ourselves and
Yeah.
Yeah.
putting checks and balances on our nation too. I mean, I think it's actually more patriotic to keep things in check,
Yeah.
honestly, you know. Otherwise, people with power do whatever they want.
Without self-accountability, there's no growth.
And so
Exactly.
one of the things that we see that I think is relevant in these kind of stories is we talk about, a military dictator who was in power for almost 20 years and was responsible for many, many assassinations, people being tortured, a lot of
Yeah.
crimes against humanity. And he was never brought to justice for those crimes against humanity. He, lived out the rest of his life. He did get arrested by the international court towards the end of his life, but he was still at home, home arrest,
Yeah.
after being responsible for
Not true
death.
punishment in the end.
And so some of these comic artists are really engaging with these stories to point out these moments of historical memory and justice, and they're books that also help connect generations. So we're talking about connecting, internationally and learning things about our own history from another angle that we haven't got to hear.
Mm.
But at the same time, within Chile itself, the artist who created Clandestine Stories, his name is Ariel. And Ariel, he used his own graphic novel to be able to open lines of communication with his children about what
Wow.
he went through, because there's a lot of challenging memories and experiences that are hard to tell. But if you can hand someone a book that says, this is my perspective and my story, and you can see it through that person's eyes, that's powerful.
It
And
is. It is very powerful. So, physical location, are you guys gonna have one, and where will it be located if you do?
so we've been doing a little perusing around town, and we're working on that. Right now, we're virtual presence. We've got our website where
Okay.
you can order clandestine stories, and then we also have a preview of our next book that's in the process of being edited now. Is called The Years of Allende, and the first chapter of that is free online on our website.
Oh.
Additionally, we got some plans for some travel
Ah.
across the states with some of these books in tow. Can we talk about California?
I think we can, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we're going to be at San Diego Comic-Con this year,
Nice.
actually at the end of next month.
That's
Yeah.
great. I'm glad to hear that. That's a good way to get it out there. Definitely Comic Cons always are a
Yeah,
great
so
way.
the San Diego Comic Con is the biggest one in the country, and it's one of the biggest platforms for international comics. And so we're excited. We'll have not only a panel that'll be dedicated to indigenous stories from Chile, so we'll be looking at First Nations narratives, the Mapuche peoples, All of those narratives are ones that we're highlighting in the comics that are coming out of Chile currently that
Nice.
tell that pre-Spanish history
Yeah.
and the interactions between the Spanish and the indigenous groups and that part of history. And so it's exciting to get to bring artists who are themselves part of those communities, and then also artists who are trying to maintain and capture those stories and the visual culture of the original peoples of that area. So that's really exciting. We're also going to have a booth, so we'll be on the floor with the Chilean government. So we'll have a booth together, Ends of the World Comics and Chile. We will have several artists there live doing drawings. We'll
Oh.
actually have a world-renowned stage magician there with us.
Oh.
Chile has one of the most well-respected uh, escape artist magicians in the world. He was recognized as the best escape artist by the Society of Brotherhood of Magicians. I'll have to get the exact title of this award, but he's outstanding. He also has a TV show in Chile where he goes around the country and shows historical sites and mythology. And he also has a graphic novel
That's
that he
great.
wrote and produced. And so he'll be there with us.
Man
It'll
of very many talents, it seems.
Pretty excited about that.
Yeah, so
That's
it should
awesome.
be very interesting. We also have, I mean, I can talk about all these artists and who's coming and the amazing stuff they've done if you want to hear. It just depends what works for you. Yeah,
Well, I can definitely, if you want, you can send me information about all of it.
for sure.
I also will be doing a write up for more details on everything.
Yes, so
Um,
I can get you any other info that you need.
okay, thank you. All right. So, how can our viewers follow the progression? I'm guessing on your website.
Yeah, so on the website, you can, it's connected to our Instagram. Our Instagram is probably the most active front where we're sharing
Okay.
images of like what we're working on behind the scenes,
Okay.
what artists are doing.
What's the website called and the Instagram name?
So the website is endsoftheworldcomics.com.
Okay.
And then our Instagram is Ends of the World Comics.
There you
So
go.
if you do at Ends of the World Comics, you'll find us. And yeah, that's where you can keep an eye on what's going on, which artists we're working with, what we're producing.
All right. So one more question. Do you plan on extending the publishing of or the comics you plan on promoting? Do you plan on extending that to people outside of Chile and in Latin America?
Definitely. So one of the challenges we have as like a small business with literally three people who right now aren't getting paid, right? Anything we're earning is going back into making more books and paying artists right now. So this is like a labor of love at this point. But what we honestly have from Chile itself, probably a backlog of at least 100, if not more,
Wow.
amazing books that we want to work with and bring here, things that are for kids. We have some artists who make amazing books about female soccer players in like middle schools that we want to get over here because they're great. We have other best-selling books that have been translated into many other languages around the world and somehow just haven't made it here. So,
Yeah.
The Years of Allende, that title, it'll be coming out hopefully by the end of this year. And it's already been translated into about 6 other languages and published in I think 13 other countries. And so I know the translation that I did in English was used for the Egyptian edition of the book because it was easier for them to translate from English to Egyptian than from Spanish to Egyptian, apparently. So
Mhm.
those kind of things are going on. But we will be expanding our comic offerings beyond just Chile
Mhm.
into other parts of Latin America. There's already other artists and books that we have our eyes on and that we want to get to talk to. One, we just have already so many amazing things that we've got like backlogged from just one place. Now, what we are doing right now that I can talk about a little bit, and this is a cool collaboration project that is really global. So when we talk like ends of the world, this is really hitting it. And Shreveport's the hub of it, and that's really cool. Is that Dr. Alexander Mikaberidze, who's a professor here at LSUS, he's a colleague of mine. He writes about Napoleon. He's one of the most important Napoleonic scholars in the world right
Ah.
now. We don't hear this, but he goes to the Smithsonian Institute regularly to lecture on Napoleon.
Huh.
He has all kinds of connections with the Sorbonne in Paris, and he's an amazing scholar. And so one day he comes to me, he says, Sam, I have a script for a graphic novel that I wrote, just on
Oh,
my computer. And so I said, okay, let me check it out. And so he shares with me the first chapter of this script. And I used it first in my classes about visual narrative as I gave it to my students. And I said,
yeah.
part of a comic artist's work that we don't think about a lot is you have to work from a script written by someone else in many cases. And so I gave them the challenge of adapting Dr. M. Everybody on campus lovingly calls him Dr. M because Mika Beritze is a mouthful. But I had a whole group of students who adapted his comic script into a short comic.
That's
And
crazy.
that was the first kind of step with this. But then within the following year, I posted some art from one of the artists who were publishing. His name is Claudio Munoz, and he did the art for a book called Lautaro. And it's one of the books we'll be talking about in San Diego. It's a book that we have a contract for and that we're editing now to publish. And when Dr. M saw the art by Claudio, he said he sent me a message. He said, "That's the guy who I want to draw my graphic novel." So we're making that happen now. We're getting close to halfway through the book. We're collaborating. Dr. M is from the country Georgia. So all the way we're getting like Eastern Europe and then all the way South America. And then Shreveport becomes the hub to make these connections happen. So we're
That's great.
excited that we'll be bringing out a graphic novel written by a local Shreveport scholar, world famous historian, and then an award-winning Chilean comic artist to make what's going to be a really amazing book. It tells a
That's
story um, of a young Georgian boy who was kidnapped and sold into slavery. This is going to be in the shoot. This is during Napoleon time. So whenever Napoleon is, I'm sure Dr. M is going to be mad at me. But during Napoleon times, uh, this young man from Georgia, Dr. M's home country, ends up getting uh, taken to Istanbul. Then he ends up being taken to Egypt. He confronts Napoleon and he switched sides. He joins Napoleon's army and then he travels around Spain, France, and other spots. And he ends up becoming what he's called, the title he's given is France's bravest warrior under
oh,
Napoleon.
oh wow.
So he never had a name though. His name was lost to history. The only
Oh
way
wow.
he ever signed a document was Al Shaheen or the Hawk.
Hmm.
And so it's the story of a warrior and it's all historically documented. So Dr. M has all the historical documentation that goes along with the
Wow.
stories. The book won't just be it will be the graphic novel that tells the story of this young man and person. Um, but then it also has all the historical documentation with the text written by Dr. M to accompany it.
That's wonderful. I hope that more opportunities to connect, artists and writers, you know, with others to present themselves, especially for you never know what other secret amazing artists are in Shreveport that would love to work with these people as well,
Yes.
are out there. So I definitely look forward to seeing you guys progress and anytime you guys have anything coming out, new book, when that new book comes out, we can talk about it again, have another Zoom interview
Oh,
and
we would love it because there's these stories are really we're picking them because they are so rich and they're so powerful. And that's a little bit kind of the benefit that I have an academic professional education in visual culture and art from Latin America. And so like I've got to dive into this stuff professionally for years and it's like my
hmm
full-time job and it's an amazing job to have. And so getting to bring that insight into the selection of which comics and which stories we're bringing forward, we want to have the stories that are powerful and historical and political, but we also want to have the stories that are for kids and heartwarming and adventures. And there's all of that out there from other perspectives that just like are radically different from American comics. And I think that's one of the things that eventually happened as a young person. I was reading Marvel and DC, as like an early teen, And it just felt like, the superhero thing. I think we're all in the superhero fatigue. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
understands that from the
Oh
Marvel
yeah.
Cinematic
So
Universe.
many Marvel movies
And
and TV shows and
the
yeah.
first the first question I had when I was researching Latin American comics was like, okay, what superheroes are there? And there's just not. So superheroes are a feature of American culture and comics, and there's a whole critique we can make of that if we wanted to. But in Latin America, it's a different format for what stories are told. What are the most important narratives that we want to put into artistic visual form? And there's a whole art history movement in Mexico, Chile, and any country that has a profound visual culture that we can also learn from. So these texts are also like parts of larger cultural artistic histories that we're getting to like step into, like one tiny little toe like dipped in there. But um these are living artists who are some of the most respected, most productive, most amazing living artists in these countries. And I'm amazingly lucky to get to sit with them and learn from them and see their art and work with them. So
Well,
it's
I'm
great.
definitely excited to watch y'all's progression, and I'm very proud that Shreveport's going to be the spot it all blossoms.
Heck
So,
yeah.
well,
Us
thank you so much for talking to me about this, and it's great to see the passion that you have for it, and I look forward again. I look forward to seeing everything that comes from it. All right. Well,
Any questions you have, let us know. I'll type
okay.
up whatever you need and send it along your way as well.
Okay, and again, anytime you want to talk more about new books and other things that are coming out, we can have conversations about it.
Heck
And yeah, I want to help you guys promote it.
All right. And the other thing I'll promote is we do have all of our graphics for our like logos designed by Redwood Creative here in Shreveport. So we
Oh,
collaborate with a local artist
nice.
and friend to get our design for our logo and our merchandise. So we're
That's
excited to collaborate.
Speaking of which, we're working on some new merchandise right now for the San Diego Comic Con.
okay.
And some of that will be available on the store.
All right. Well, definitely, you guys put it once it's on the site. I'll link your site to it so that people can find your merchandise if they want to buy it.
Should have some
So,
Cool.
stickers and some prints and interesting things to look at.
Oh yeah.
okay. Well, thank you so much again for talking to me. You
Thank
take
you.
care, and we'll talk again, I'm sure.
All right.
Cool.
Have a good one.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye. Thank you for watching Architects Artistry, and that was Enzo World Comics. They have a great story. I look forward to seeing more of what they will produce. While we're here, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys their Instagram so you can, get connected to them if you would like to follow them. Or so we're going to go ahead and look at that right here. There we go. Now this is their Instagram. It's ends.of.the.world.comics. Now you can just search up Ends of the World Comics and they'll show up. You'll know there's their logo that they got designed by our local artist here in Shreveport. Um, you can see they post their what they're covering and what's coming up next. So it's a good way to follow them and see what they have in the future. But yeah, so I look forward to interviewing them possibly for their next book that's coming up here, Years of Allende, The Years of Allende. Yeah, so I'm definitely going to try to talk to them about this book here. Well, thank you so much for watching again. You can find more Zoom interviews on our website, on our KSLA News 12 Now app, on our Roku and Apple TV apps, and on YouTube. If you want to find us on KSLA site, you just go the KSLA site, go to community, and it will be under Architects Artistry. Or if you can go under podcasts and find us at the bottom, it's Architects Artistry. Click on that, and it's all of our Zoom interviews and my special artist mini documentaries that I run every month. We'll talk about more next Saturday at noon. Always Saturday at noon. Catch me there. Take care and have a great day.